Awesome. Well, I'm glad we could find a time that worked for everyone here. We've had quite a lot of changes to our implementation plans for our project level DAST scan execution policies, which is a bit of a mouthful to say. So I just wanted to walk through those. Actually, before I do that, I do want to just recap some of our permissions requirements for policies, especially as we've started to do this problem validation research that we're in the middle of. It's become more apparent that organizations have a strong need to separate out permissions that for when scans are run and have those separated out between the development team and the security team. A big pain point is that right now developers can change their GitLab ci.yaml file. And for organizations that have thousands of projects, if you're trying to enforce a policy across the organization that you must run a DAST scan every time the pipeline runs, or you must run a DAST scan once a week, like making sure that the developers don't mess something up for thousands of projects is a near impossible task. And so some of the requirements that we have in place for our policies is that developers can view it. There's not a problem with viewing it, but only project maintainers can create, edit, and delete policies. And in the future, we want to make that even more locked down so that maintainers can only submit proposed changes, and then those get routed to a named list of individuals, which typically would be the security team, and the security team would approve any of those changes. So I just wanted to call that out because I think that might come into play in our discussions later on, but thanks for bearing with me on that recap. Tiago, do you want to give us kind of
just a quick question on that?
Yeah,
I would assume that the security team would have to be a maintainer and a member of the security team. So you'd have to have those two permissions essentially.
No, not necessarily.
So they could be a developer. Like we don't necessarily care as long as they're marked as a member of the security team.
Yeah, it would just be a custom list of individuals. So we wouldn't worry about any other permissions that they do or don't have. If they were allowed to be an approver, then they could approve that policy change.
Got it. Okay.
Tiago, I don't want to put you on the spot. Do you want to, but are you comfortable walking through some of the changes and the implementation details of how you're proposing to handle this, the engineering side?
Sure am. Yeah. So we last time we met, we talked about using a database implementation to store some of these policies, how they are going to be done. That was before we had a spike, and during the spike, we were hashing out. This was done by Mathieu. He was hashing out what this would look like and started drafting up the implementation plans for it. As an alternative to database, he started playing with the YAML solution. So the challenge when we're doing database changes are, that it's going to take a little bit longer. The maintainer review, that's a given. But in something that's new as this, and that we don't have complete certainty what it's going to look like, it might also result in some changes down the road, and refactoring database is always harder than doing all the code. So the other thing that came out of the spike as he was doing the YAML alternative is that you get some things for free that you'd need to manually go and do for database. So for example, the permission and the auditability of changes. It does make permissions a little bit trickier for down the road, but for MVC, it's pretty straightforward. You create a project where that YAML file will live, and you only give permission to the people who are allowed to change the policy, and that's it, complete. So there's a high degree of optimism that a YAML approach can give you a working MVC in a single milestone. You could do these things in a single milestone, and that now you have something to iterate on. Whereas if we were going down the DB approach, very unlikely that we get something in one milestone, maybe not even two, right? By the time you get all the database changes in and the models in, now you can start doing the actual policy and APIs that will be needed for the front end to talk to these things. So there's a big driver there.
So just a quick question,
Sure.
and you guys probably went through this. You mentioned refactoring is a little bit, so one of the challenges with YAML is if you change the structure of YAML, it's really difficult because everyone's got their own YAML file, it's written. Whereas if you have a database, you just rename the column and do a migration. Yeah. So I just want to make sure that you guys are fully on board. Like if you restructure the YAML, you'll have to figure out how to read someone's old YAML for backward compatibility.
It's a good call out. Yeah, it will. So in a way, you would need to deal with a sort of migration, right, for the YAML. Either you need to do something that's backwards compatible. All right, this person wrote in that old version, or you break it and say, hey, I've broke your YAML. You need to rewrite it. I think that's a choice in terms of what do we want to optimize for? Do we want to call this alpha in MVC and get a chance to run and see how people use it? And if the few people that use it break it, then we need to rely on their goodwill to go and fix that, or do we want to put the effort in to do it? But as Seth points out, it's treatable, but then it reduces a bit the advantages.
So just a quick note on that, though, that's a limitation that we were going to run into regardless of whether we do the database or the YAML approach, because another one of the product requirements that we have is to let users either do this in our UI or to do it in a text-based, it doesn't have to be YAML, but YAML or JSON or some sort of code-based way. When we explored this with users, we found it to be very polarizing. With very strong opinions. You have people like, that are diehard, I will only do this in code and I don't care what kind of UI rules editor you give me. I just want to do it in code. And that's how I know exactly what I'm doing. And then you have people on the other end of the spectrum that say, I don't want to touch the code. I don't understand YAML. Like, I just want to use your UI. And I found it was about 50-50, but it was very heavily opinionated. So even if we did something in the database, we would still want to let them put in a code representation of that rule. So I think we're going to run into that. It might ease up on the migration, but we would still need to represent that in some way. So, just a note there.
Thank you. I'm pretty much done. I mean, if I keep going to detail here, I'll redo Matthieu's demo. There's already a video for that, so anybody watching this can go watch that instead. If there are any questions around the choice.
So I have some questions, but before I come to those, I just want to highlight some of our future plans here as well, because, Tiago highlighted this has the benefit of letting us iterate fast, get something out in one milestone. It does come with the drawback that the user experience is suboptimal. So down the road, we would want to, at a bare minimum, auto-create the associated policy management project and possibly even probably hide it away. When we're dealing with those permissions, if we're trying to synchronize things, maintainers on the one project need to be developers on the other project, like that synchronization is going to get messy really fast if users can go into that other project and make changes. Like, how do we do a two-way synchronization without just confusing the end user? So we'll probably end up hiding that away at the end of the day and abstracting it away. So to the user, for the user experience, like they go in, they create the policy, it gets submitted for approval, someone approves it, and it's applied, and they don't actually see or know or care about where that underlying data is being stored. So that would make it easier in the future too, if we did want to move it to the database down the road, you know, it would be a transparent migration because we wouldn't be exposing the fact that we're using a repository to the end user. So I do have some questions because I know we've also got overlap with the DAST team and your plans for scheduled scans. And I think this is an area that we probably haven't discussed enough anyway, you know, regardless of where we store it. So whether it's the database or here, we want to make sure that we're working together in that regard. On our group call this morning, Alan proposed that, you know, in the past, we were talking about a two-way synchronization where you could create a policy and that would show up on your scheduled DAST scans, and you could create a scheduled DAST scan and that would show up as a policy. Derek, I don't know what you had in mind for permissions on that, but I'm starting to wonder if we want to rethink that and possibly only have our policies show up as like read-only scheduled scans that can't be edited because of that permission model that we're pursuing.
Right. Well, that was one thing that we had talked about, was that those policies that had been set up in the policy editor would not be able to be edited in the DAST schedule area, because I want to leave it open for developers to be able to schedule scans from that UI and not have to worry about going through any maintainer or security team member or anything like that. So I think that it makes sense. I don't have a problem not showing the DAST scheduled scans in the policies. I feel like that we don't need that level of shared. I don't know. To me, they're not policies. They're not being set up by maintainers or security team members. They're not being set as you must do this. It's something that a developer is setting up in that project because they want to scan while they're working on this feature, and they know they're deploying code, you know, every week to a staging server. Once they're done with that feature, maybe they want to delete their scan. I mean, it's not really a policy per se. So I think that it makes sense. I do think that it would be nice to show the policies in the DAST scheduled scans, just because if you are a developer and you're thinking about setting one up, maybe there's already one that covers what you wanted to do and you don't need to add an extra one. So I think that it does make sense to show those there. But yeah, permissions wise, I don't think that you should be able to edit the policies in that that UI, and you should only be able to edit ones that were created through the DAST schedule area. So that might make it a little tricky. We're going to have to tag those somehow to show which ones are which.
Yeah, I mean, it almost points to a separate, like, you know, I don't think we would want those ones to show up in the policy area. So then this new model policies would show up in the DAST scheduled scan area as read only, just FYI, this is here, but it wouldn't go the other way. So, I mean, if we do that, then I feel like that mitigates a lot of the challenges that we might have as well. You know, if you're having your stuff in the database, we're having ours in a repository, we'll probably move to the database at some point in the future, but at least for now, you know, we've got two separate data stores. Maybe this eases that problem. I don't know.
I'm not sure. And I don't think that it would necessarily be a hard requirement to have the policies show up in the DAST scheduled scans area as in first or even second iteration. I mean, to me, I don't feel like it's absolutely necessary. I think it's a nice to have, but I don't think that it's going to kill any of the user experience in either area.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely. That could be kicked down the road pretty far.
Yeah.
Since we're really talking about two different problems we're trying to solve, right? One is let the developers schedule a scan for their own benefit versus let the security department require a scan to be run every week.
Right. Yep.
I had a question there about treating the results from a policy scan versus a scheduled scan differently, if that's something we would be worried about. But mainly thinking about the scan results policy that's coming up later, right? The one that says, hey, if this scan fails or this scan has X number of results of this type, then fail the pipeline.
Well, so I guess,
yeah.
I mean, we don't have requirements written for the scan results policies yet. So I'll caveat this with, we're still figuring it out, but most likely we would want those policies to apply to all scans that were run, regardless of what caused it to run. So we'd probably want those scan results ones to apply to any and every scan that's run would have a scan results policy enforced.
the difference though would be if you're looking at CI/CD jobs versus on-demand DAST scans, because there is no pipeline to fail with on-demand scans. So depends really on how we're going to set up the policies to begin with. If we're going to set it up as a CI/CD job, then you're really going to have a separate set of rules that you could apply to it versus the on-demand scans.
So that is true. And we have accounted for that, like in the prototype, you'll notice, and I mean, it's a poor man's UX. So I don't know when we actually have UX take a look at it, it might change, but we just have a parenthetical note there that says like the action of allow and fail the pipeline, that only applies if it was part of a pipeline to begin with. So I think we can design to support that, basically saying that certain actions will only take effect if they're in a state where they can take effect, right?
So a couple of things just to note. So on demand, it technically does run in a pipeline. It's a pipeline of one job.
Sure.
But one of the things to think about is the jobs have their list of vulnerabilities and they don't understand what vulnerabilities have already been managed within GitLab. And this is something that I'm working on another issue. So for example, if DAST finds 3 vulnerabilities, the DAST scanner knows that it found 3 vulnerabilities. It doesn't know that those 3 vulnerabilities have been dismissed within GitLab. So if you say, hey, you find 3 vulnerabilities, fail the job or throw up an alert or whatever, it doesn't know that those have already been managed somewhere else. And this is one thing that I just pointed out to Matt, because it would be nice that what we do is we take those 3 vulnerabilities and the scanner just sends those over to GitLab and says, hey, I found these 3 vulnerabilities. And GitLab sends back a message that's like, great, I don't care about those. They've been dismissed. Until we have that in place, the scanners across, whether it's DAST or any of the others, are always going to say, hey, I found 3 vulnerabilities or whatever it may be, high, medium, low, all that data. They don't have the context as to whether those have been dismissed or whether they're being worked on or whatever.
It's a great call out, but do we want to do anything other than that as a first iteration? Like, it feels to me like taking that into consideration wouldn't be optional. It's like that's how we want to do the first one.
Yeah,
I think I was gonna say, I think it's fine. I think you may end up with a major usability headache, particularly if you have like some call out that's like, hey, this is a critical vulnerability, and someone's like, I don't care about that. It's a false positive. Because of the false positive problem, it may become a huge annoyance for customers.
Yeah, so I agree with that. I mean, I just want to kind of refocus this discussion because I fully agree with what you've said, Seth, but like right now I just really want to focus on, because we're not even dealing with scan results policies right now. I think we've kind of, sidetracked a little bit. Right now we're just trying to make sure that what we've got will work for these DAST scan execution policies. So just running the scanner. There actually is a pretty long list of like architectural considerations that we're going to have to work through when we get to those scan results policies. Like customers want to be notified only for new vulnerabilities, for example. Like there's a lot that we don't support today. We'll cross that when we get there.
Yep.
But in the 4 minutes we have left, I just want to double click on, engineering's implementation approach of using a repository and just double check, like, is that going to cause any problems for DAST? Like with these changes to how we interact with those DAST scan schedule policies, does that streamline the UX? Basically, I'm asking, are there any other outstanding concerns, or are there areas where we may need our engineers to collaborate on a deeper level to make sure everything's going to work?
Can I just ask
Yeah.
a quick question here? Stepping back a little bit, I was pulling up the designs for what we currently have. Are we deciding kind of right now so right now we're supposed to show all scans that are created in the on-demand flow are going to show up in policies, and all the scans created in the policies we're going to show up in the on-demand scans area. Are we deciding now that if you create a recurring scan from the policies page, it will show up in the on-demand library, but you won't be able to edit it? And if you create a recurring scheduled scan from on-demand scans, it will not show up in policies.
Correct.
Is that correct?
And it will be read-only. So if you create it in the policy area, it will be read-only in the DAST scheduled scan area.
Right, not, okay.
Because we have a different set of permissions to edit these policies.
Okay, so in this design that I originally had, where this is the on-demand scan screen, you click recurring schedule and it would put up this banner that says you're creating a policy. Are we still creating a policy from that?
No, so that
Okay.
would go away.
Okay, but this is gonna have to be updated a little bit, but if these are created via policies, it'll show something that says, hey, this is a policy. You just can't edit it.
Correct.
Okay.
And I don't think you'd be able to run it either, right?
Yeah, you couldn't run, edit, or delete. It's just like an FYI, this came from the policy, just so you know, we already have something scheduled here.
Okay, you can't run edit delete policies, and from the policy side of things, you won't see those scheduled scans created from here anyway. Okay, so you might have some duplicates. You might create a policy and an on-demand scan that run the exact same things.
Sure.
That's okay.
Right. You might, but it's fine because the permissions are different. And as a policy editor, you would want to create something that a developer couldn't just remove when they wanted to.
Okay, and there is a use case for a developer to want to run a recurring scheduled scan over and over. Okay, okay.
Yep.
So the one technical thing is there won't necessarily be data integrity between the policies and the profiles. So because the policies are in YAML, you could say site profile A, and site profile A may never exist. And I think that problem would show up at runtime when that schedule goes to run. It's going to say, I need profile A won't exist, and then that job's going to fail.
Right. I was thinking about that as well. And that's why I was wondering if maybe as an MVC, we start with the pipeline jobs for policies rather than on-demand scans. One, because it's easier to translate to the other groups for SAST or any of the others, and they're going to be doing pipeline as well. But also, yeah, there is a larger chance, since you're not relying on the database to pull in dynamically what profiles we have. Yeah, you could delete the profile, you could change it to where it's, I don't know, you change it to an active scan, you want to use it on a site that hasn't been validated yet, you would get an error there. So yeah, I wonder if we don't want to start with the pipeline jobs instead of on-demand scans.
I'm not sure I followed all of that. to be honest, but if you did, Seth, then I think we're okay.
Yeah, I don't understand the problem either, Seth. How would you be able to schedule a scan without having a profile? Isn't that a mandatory choice as you
Well,
configure it?
so it's defined in the YAML, right? So let me see here.
Right. So if you go into that repo and edit
right
the YAML
here,
directly,
You're right.
so if I say scan scan profile, whatever, and that doesn't exist, when this YAML is created, it's not necessarily enforcing that those profiles exist.
Understood.
Right.
Or I say scan profile A, this is managed by a security professional, and then a developer goes in and changes scan profile A to scan a non-relevant website.
So
All right, so it's similar. It's similar to what I was actually asking from your own question. But yeah, I think the answer there is it'll just fail. Like policy is broken. But
yeah,
do we wanna do anything about regardless of this is done in YAML or database? There's still the question of a developer has permission to change any profiles. That means they could change a profile that's used by a policy, and by, you know, indirect relationship, they changing the policy. Do we want to do something about that?
Yeah, that does concern me a little bit. I mean, it would be nice if we could lock down some of these profiles, or maybe if a profile was used in a policy, then the developers could not edit that, or, you know, if we could put some sort of restrictions around that. I know we're starting to, our permission model is a bit rigid, so I don't know how much we can do there easily, but that would
well,
be.
and you're looking at, if you're in YAML, like the so we won't know if you're using the YAML in this other project, we won't know that this profile is being used in a policy necessarily. Like we'd have to read it into the database and like lock down that profile as saying, hey, there was a, like every, I mean, I guess it would have to run on a schedule itself or something to go through and look at all the YAML that have been created. Because if you can create these outside of the web UI, then you're not going to necessarily know that a policy was created that's using that profile.
I don't know that this is an untreatable problem, Derek. Like without looking at the code and going too much into detail, if somebody's about to change a profile, there could be a hook or pre-check that says, hey, is there a linked management project for policies? Yes. Is this policy part of one that's in there? Yes. Okay, so you're not allowed to do this unless you're a developer.
Sure.
So
yeah, I don't think any of these problems we can't solve. They're just corner cases that are gonna
just extra things, right? More is more.
yeah.
Yep.
I mean, we could do the reverse, where as you save the YAML file, we have a hook and we go and we lock each of those profiles.
Yeah, that's probably easier to do actually.
Which is,
So I think there's some ways to handle this.
especially if we have that project hidden away, so you can only edit that YAML file through our UI, then that might help as well too. Cool. Well, I know we're up on time. I think we'll just try to continue to iterate asynchronously on that question about permissions for DAST profiles. Otherwise, I feel like we made some good progress, made some decisions today. Thanks everyone for your time. If we need to sync up another synchronous discussion, let me know and we'll get it on the calendar.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a good day, everyone.
All right.